Welcome once again to another awesome episode of the FLAMA podcast, the ultimate guide to the gaming industry. I am your host, as always, Angel. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for inviting me on.
My pleasure. So, Steve, I usually like to start the podcast with a question. And I was watching, I like to do my research on my mentors, and I did a little bit of research on you. And I watched 2019, I think it was the 2019 Games Gathering Conference.
Yes.
Yes. And you said a quote that really captivated me, which was, developing yourself is developing your game.
Yeah.
Let's talk about
that. Yeah. Right. So this is really interesting to me, right? This is something I've been thinking about. That talk was in Kiev, actually.
Gotcha.
Just before war broke out. So it seems extra poignant to me when I think back to making that talk, really, in many ways. But that was really a lot of my ideas were coming together at that point. And it starts from this real key idea that every game we make is a reflection of who we are when we make it. I don't really see how that could not be true of almost any creative endeavor. And a video game is, it's kind of unique, isn't it? Because it's part science, it's part art, it's all these different crafts coming together, and the most arty artists and the most sciencey scientists coming together to create something that we hope players are gonna love. And I think it's the game that the experience that's expressed for the player is a reflection in very many ways of the team that made that game. And I don't, it just seeps into every pore, every little decision that's made about how we want to react to the player, the experience we want to give the player. And all these little decisions that are made in how we present and what the art style is, what it looks like, how it, the technical decisions we make, what we favor when we have the trade-off choices, they're all reflections of the team that make the game. And so if that's true, if you accept that to be true, then you developing yourself, making yourself a more effective, a more self-aware person. Doing that as a team has to be reflected in the game that you're making. So that's kind of my thinking when I say developing yourself is developing your game. It's a very real connection to me. I don't really see that as an abstract thing. You can't show up at work and be a different person to who you were when you left your home entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll talk more about what that means. But yeah, that's the core thing about this core idea of every game you make is a reflection of who you are when you make it.
Gotcha. How come, let's say when we have like a painter like Picasso and we see his blue period pieces, we're like, oh yeah, that's a reflection when he lost, I don't know, his sister or something. When we see a movie, we see, the director was going through like a very difficult time. That's why the movie is like that. Or a song. It's very personal. So people, I guess they easily see the creative expression of the creator. I don't see, I agree with you 100%, but I don't see generally people feel that way when it comes to video games. How come that's the case?
Are you saying there then that you think in a video game it's not so obviously one person's artistic expression at that point? Because I would definitely agree with that if that's the point you're making there.
Gotcha. What I'm trying to say is when we see like a painting, right? We try to connect with the painter, but let's say when I play Silent Hill, I'm not necessarily like I'm not like, the creator was going through a very tough time. Like it should be, because it's art, right? It's still art. Like I wonder how come that does not happen.
Yeah, and I do think it's grounded in that same thinking of there are a few games which are
Mhm.
very much one person's vision, single
Mhm.
auteurs, but I think those are largely the exceptions that prove the rule, really. And I think certainly the best games I've ever been involved in my career have been where we found a way to apply the wisdom of the team to the whole process of creating that video game. And if that's true, then there's certainly things that unite teams, but it isn't. You couldn't say, "Oh, that team um, suffered a loss," although that could happen. You know that you could lose a significant team
Right.
member,
Right.
and I mean that has happened to teams as well, and you might be able to feel that. But if you've got 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,
Right.
200 people
Right.
working on a team, and all those collective decisions, it's I don't think you're going to be able to naturally say that's because that one artist had that one experience.
Gotcha.
They use their art to express that way. I think it's what I've seen done best is a team game. Games made by a team. It's a reflection of that team and their culture and how they were led, importantly, but also how they interacted with one another.
Gotcha.
That's the way I see it.
Gotcha. No, I do see what you're saying, definitely. Um, we also had a conversation earlier, and you talked about the Last of Us 2, the
Mm,
intro, the teaser trailer. There
yeah,
was a scene that was the trailer was very dark,
yeah,
and then you
and
told me something along the lines of, I, it, it seems as though they're going through like a very tough time. That's a
yeah.
very dark trailer.
I mean, I don't know people who work for that studio.
Right.
I've interviewed people who've worked there, and
Gotcha.
I've worked with people whose friends have worked there. And obviously there's things that have gone into the press, but it just felt to me, I hadn't seen the full game at that point. I was anticipating it because I loved the first game,
Yes.
um, and and just when that trailer came out, it just wasn't tonally as well as visually. It was a dark experience and a
Yeah.
threatening experience, and I was like, oh, it surprised me. I wasn't what I was expecting, and I wonder, and I just, because I have this thinking of every game has to be a reflection of who you are when you make it, I felt, what's going on with this team then?
Yes.
And I felt like almost a duty of care towards that team. I was saying to friends I work with, like, should we reach out to these people and ask them if they're okay? I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong. They might tell me no.
Right. Right.
It was
Right.
just an artistic endeavor. But for me, looking at that, I'm like, oh, I feel like you'd have to be in quite a generally dark place to make
Hmm.
such a dark experience as that. I mean, maybe the full game was not quite as dark as the trailer ultimately. Um, but yeah, and at some level it felt right to them to express this is the first introduction of our game to our players,
Sure.
not of our franchise because it was a sequel, but of our game, and the choices to do something as dark as that seemed revelatory of of an environment in which a game team can get into, and I've certainly experienced a team getting into a darker place.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes, and I do really admire that ability that you have to see that and be like, oh, if a game is a reflection of yourself or the team, I wonder what's going on. Like, I really admire that. And I wish more of us have that perspective of not only like, oh, the product just appeared out of nowhere.
yeah,
No, it's hard work, it's collaboration, it's blood, sweat, tears, right?
yeah. And it does sadden me when I see the press responses to certain games, and when I've experienced very negative responses to games as well. Because in my experience, developers, the people who make the game, they don't set out to make a bad game. They don't set out, generally speaking, we always have to be careful with generalizations.
Right.
They set out to do something delightful for players. They want to delight players. They want to enchant players. They want to take players on some sort of a journey. And they want the game to be an expression of their best work, in whatever their craft is. So when they put that out to the world, for it to be, get a reaction, I just don't care, lazy developers who didn't care. It can be super crushing for the individuals involved. And sometimes sometimes it goes beyond that as well. Not, I can't tell you the exact teams, but I do know of developers who've been threatened at a personal level. Getting messages like, "There's a bomb under your car. You make sure you check it before you leave." You're like, "What, over a video game? Really?"
Whoa.
So it's strange, but it's indicative of something. But yeah, I always like to see a bit more empathy and a bit more compassion in the world. Really, I think everything would go along a bit better with that.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. Steve, I've heard people say that personal development is usually pain plus introspection. Some people say we trade trauma for wisdom. And I had the chance and the honor to read your book, Liberated Leadership, which has been awesome. I'm still halfway through.
Yeah.
I had a couple of friends buy it as well. And I see there's a lot of wisdom in your book. But wisdom doesn't come for free, right?
No. It really doesn't.
Unfortunately, right?
I think where wisdom about self in particular, and how looking at how we respond, looking to ourselves and thinking, how do I respond to this situation? How could I be more effective? How could I be a better leader for the people that I'm leading? Starts off, the absolute foundation of that is self-awareness. And self-awareness is not our default state. We're not born looking inward, actually, and analyzing ourselves and our effect on others.
Right.
And often, in fact, I might say always, where I've seen people really go on that journey into self-awareness, and where a lot of growth derives, is from some form of trauma. And I wish there was a better way in. I've always looked for, what could it be if I wanted to help someone start a journey of self-awareness, and from their growth and from their becoming, a better leader, a better video game developer, and all those good things. What can we offer that's not trauma? And yet to find something that really substitutes, that really sets someone on that some sort of need, some sort of dramatic gap between the person you feel you could be and the person you are today. I mean, I think that then sets off a really powerful question. And when it was first posed to me, it kind of put shivers down my spine a bit. So I thought, it must be the right inquiry to follow. I mean, that was, the question was, are you prepared to give up the person you think you should be to become the person you really could be? That sounds simple. Yeah, of course I am. But are you, though?
That's a good question.
That should be requires looking at, where did you get the idea of the person you should be from? And that's going to take you that's going to take you on a journey inwardly that can be quite difficult, actually. What are all the assumptions I've made about who I should be
Yeah.
as a person, and then about who I should be at work? I mean, because you've read the at least the first half of my book, that for a long time I was trying to lead in a way that I thought I should. And when I look back, no one really told me that I had to be perfect, that I had to have the answers to everyone's questions, that I had to be able to tell everyone what to do as a leader.
Right.
No one told me all of that, but for some reason I'd absorbed that message from all of the experiences that I'd had in leading that. And we talked before, didn't we, about where these signals come from in our culture. And I think if we look historically, certainly in Anglo-American cultures, the traditional leadership, if you like, is still based on that strongman model that we talked about, that's really characterized by a sort of domineering, authoritarian approach. And I don't think that style of leadership, that really often creates a culture of fear, and a sort of micromanagement style, I don't think that really works in the complexity of an environment, or any knowledge-based industry for sure, but certainly in video game development. I don't think that really is the most effective way. Or I should say, in the long term, it will get a short-term result for sure.
Gotcha.
But if you really want to maximize the capability and effectiveness of a group of people over a long period of time, and you want those people to innovate, and you want a strong culture of experimentation, of risk-taking, of continuous learning, of personal growth and development, and you can't really have one person or a small number of people at the top telling everyone else what to do. Right? You need something more. You need a collaborative, an empowering approach where people have that space to bring their skill and talent to it. I mean, they have clearly defined boundaries and a common culture and direction and vision, but they know how to input their talent effectively. That's the style of leadership that I realized I needed to create, and that's what I ended up calling liberated leadership, because it was the liberation from those false ideas, but it's also the liberation from trying to effectively wear a mask at work, of creating this model of a leader I thought I should be, back to the idea of who I thought I should be. And then it suddenly opened up for me. I thought, this is who I could be. And then from there, this is what the team could be. If you could set yourself free, you could then set the whole team free. And then you really might unleash this full wisdom, as I've talked about, of a team on this challenge of making a video game. Because it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to make video games. I always say it's hard to make a video game if you don't want it to be good and you don't really care about the way you make it. If you want it to be great and you really care about the way you make it, it's literally difficult. And you've got your heart and soul in it normally, pretty early on.
Of course.
So it's a lot. So I think you need a new way to respond if you're gonna, love it and create something players love.
How did you get to that conclusion of, it's better to have a more collaborative style of leadership?
Yeah. So I think trauma for me, I mean, I had 3 months away from work with stress-induced depression, a full
Right.
burnout, really.
Yeah.
And so I had to change. I remember sitting with my consultant psychiatrist, and he said to me, "Look, Steve, most people who have this illness, they get it again. They have another episode, and the average number of episodes is 4." He said that, and the realizes that the real underlying reason for that is that most people get well through rest, through medication, or combination of both, and then they put themselves in exactly the same situation and behave in exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be a most genius scientist in the world to know that if you repeat the same experiment with the same variables, you'll probably get the same result.
Sure.
Yeah. So I was like, oh wow, I have to change. I have to change the way I think as well as the way I work, and those two things have to happen. I did, and as I talk about this in the book, I did decide in that moment I was going to be the best patient. I was going to be a perfect patient as well.
Yep.
Which
Yep. I read it.
Sort of showed how much I had to learn, really, because it was the perfectionism that got me there. It's like,
Yeah.
Steve, you need to let that go. You need to let the idea of being perfect go. Because no one's perfect, of course. And that was I kind of and it was a release as well. This is why I call it Liberated, because I'd never wanted to lead like that. So I don't know why I'd made the decision to conform to that model. It's not, it didn't match with my personal values, particularly all my, all my instinct, really. My instinct was that, that everyone in the team had something to build, to bring to the experience. So that was the foundational moment, and it was, I suppose, fortunate for me that I had a group of leaders working with me who felt similarly evangelical about making that change as well. So we went on that journey together. This was around 2013. Around 2013, we started on that together.
That's beautiful. I definitely resonate with your conversation about liberated leadership, and kind of stop using the strongman model. I wonder how come usually in leadership positions there's a lot of lack of self-awareness. It seems as though I have worked in multiple organizations before. Again, very good bosses, very effective, but when it comes to self-awareness, to kind of have that humility to be like, hey, we made a mistake. Or when you as a subordinate respectfully say, hey, boss, I think we shouldn't do this. The ego comes out. What I'm trying to say is, I wonder if it's something that's cultural as well. Kind of the people who are ego-driven kind of put themselves in position of power rather than the people who are self-aware.
Yeah, that's a great question as well, and there is a question about who gets to lead as well, because if you think about who are the people who get to, be the directors of Fortune 500 companies. Now, there's a certain drive and commitment, and I would say a lot of sacrifices needed.
Sure.
To get to that position, including often sacrificing a lot of social and personal experiences. So, and I really wonder as well, this is an interesting phenomenon I've seen in my career, is the more senior gets in an organization, the less feedback they receive, which seems totally counter to what you want. If you step back
Right.
from it as an organization and you thought, well, that's not what I want, for this organization. I want the most people with the most influence to be getting the most feedback
Yes.
at a personal level, as well as what's going on the business as well. And I know, people have coaches and so on, but in terms of like really effective feedback from a committed manager, it seems to decrease the more senior people get, as if when you get into a leadership position or a senior position, you're like fully formed.
Right.
Whether you're not, the challenge just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and your need to learn and grow is that demand is increasing, right, as well. And so that's one part of it. So I think people in senior positions don't get enough feedback that they need to grow. And then the other thing is creating an atmosphere of psychological safety. So to get feedback from your team. So, if you think about a situation in your own life, maybe where you didn't speak up at work, and then you think about the flip of that, a situation where you felt completely comfortable speaking up at work about or sharing ideas or even things you think that are not working, as you mentioned, and you compare, well, what was the difference? What happened there? And in the first case, what are the things most people say? Well, why, when I'm coaching people, I talk about this. Why did you not speak up? The things they tend to say are things like, I didn't want to appear stupid. I thought it was nobody else was really asking any questions or giving any feedback, so I didn't feel I could. Or the leaders didn't really offer any forum for it as well.
Sure.
And what they're talking about there is interpersonal risk. All those things are interpersonal risks. The risks that I'm going to lose, like my reputation, my your perception of my competence, and or fear of being disruptive in some way. Those are all interpersonal risks, and we all manage those all the time in groups because we're social animals, and we want to look after our place in the group. The opposite of that, the place in which you felt completely comfortable speaking out, and I ask people about that, they start talking about, well, if in that team it felt like we were almost like everyone was friends, or they say, oh yeah, there was managers and leaders, but it kind of felt like everyone was equal, even though we all knew some people had certain responsibilities and others didn't.
Sure.
Or there was just a natural forum for me to come up, and then that's what they're describing there is what Professor Amy Edmondson called psychological safety. And the interesting thing about that climate where people feel they can share ideas, questions, reservations about whatever's happening at work without fear of retribution or the cost of those interpersonal risks I talk about. That's psychological safety. And, Google in their Project Aristotle did some work that it was the key defining factor of effective teams. Teams with high psychological safety were more productive, better regarded by Google executives, and brought more revenue into Google than teams with lower psychological safety. So it's super important. So go back to your original question there of why do leaders end up in what looks to us from the outside as this very egoic state,
right,
and try to be slow to judge, but it certainly can look that way on the outside.
Right.
It's A, are they getting any feedback, but B, are they really hearing what's actually going on in their organization? Because if you don't hear about it, you can't manage it, can you? And you can't respond to it, and you can't lead it. So I would say when I'm coaching leaders, you should worry much more about what you're not hearing than what you are hearing.
Ooh.
That's the key. Because what you're hearing, you hope that you'll find a way to respond to it. But it's the things everyone understands and knows at the ground level, at the code face, we might say, if you'll excuse that pun, that you don't hear as a leader.
Right.
They're the things that are ultimately going to trip your organization up in some way.
Definitely. After all these years and all this wisdom, you came up with Liberated Leadership. How does Liberated Leadership deals with these issues of the strongman model, leaders not receiving feedback, a team not having psychological safety? How does Liberated Leadership answer these questions?
So Liberated Leadership really is a model based on serving the team. It's a servant leadership based model. And I always worry when I say that to people, especially men, I have to say, that it sounds really passive and they're going to worry about that, worry about being passive. Like, isn't my job to lead? Leadership's an active role. I was like, no, it's completely active. It's, in fact, in some ways, it's harder work than just going around telling people what to do, because it's, I think the best definition I've ever heard of servant leadership is find out what people need and get it for them. And the key word in that is need, because if you're just finding out what people want and getting it for them, then you're just a servant. You're not a servant leader, are you? It's judging what it is that people need that is critical to this style of leadership. So how does it respond to that? It's based in the idea that we can show up grounded in authenticity. And authenticity is a bit of a tricky one in a way, because it's, when I say, I don't subscribe to the idea that there's a fixed true self to which I can be true. And actually, there's a really great TED talk by Professor Hermana Ibarra called The Authenticity Paradox. And it's well worth a watch if people want to spend a bit of time on that. But her core point is, look, if you have a commitment to growth and development, then the self to which you're trying to be true is always changing. Right? So for me, true authenticity is accepting who you are right in this moment, but committing to trying to become a better version of yourself all the time. That's what doesn't mean you can't play a role. Doesn't mean you can't play a part. It certainly doesn't mean you never edit yourself. This is not an excuse to just say whatever the hell's in your head and pay it off with, oh, I was just being authentic. No, you weren't. You meant pain from the other person.
Yes.
And you knew it when you said it. So that's not what we mean by authentic. So
gotcha.
It's really that journey into self-awareness is the heart of authentic, and then showing up in that way. Because if you model that for the people you lead, you are tacitly setting the direction that personal growth and development is the way to succeed in this organization. You expect it of yourself and you expect it of others. So that's at the heart of it. And then it's shifting away from this idea of a small group of people telling everyone else what to do, and leaders taking the responsibility, yes, to align on vision, yes, to agree direction, yes, to define desired outcomes for software in the short term and the longer term, so this milestone and the end game, but allow all the individual crafts to work out the outputs. So it's outcome being, an experience we want the player to have, or a change in the player's behavior we want to achieve, or the way a player feels we want to achieve. And then getting a team to go, I know how that can be achieved. That's when the magic starts to happen, bringing it that way, rather than you put an icon in the top right of the screen and it needs to
Right.
be conform to this brand thing that you can
Right.
download off Confluence or something. That's not it for me. And the other thing is it's liberating for the leader, because it's way more exciting, freeing. You have time to actually set back if you lead people by outcome, rather than trying to tell everyone what to do and manage the output, manage the work, the things people actually do.
Right. Exactly. I really resonate with your concept of authenticity and being yourself. And you are right when it comes to like, hey, you got to be yourself. As you mentioned before, the self is always changing. You always discover new things about yourself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely. I really like that. I usually like to watch the Gordon Ramsay show, like when he goes to like the restaurants and then he's like, "Oh, this food is shit. We have to change everything." And then he kind of like coaches the leaders and then the whole place changes. So let's say you have this show, you're Gordon Ramsay, and you go into a gaming company, right? This gaming company, they have good ideas, they have good track record in the past, but right now they're not going through a good time. They have the strongman method that we mentioned before. How would you, as Steve, coach them to become liberated to then produce awesome experiences for their games?
Yeah. I actually think Gordon Ramsay is quite an effective leader. He just makes it happen really quickly and really aggressive. He creates conflict and drama, doesn't he? A, for TV, but also I think to accelerate the process. So for me, I think it would always start with the leadership team, and I like to go through a process of values, mission, and vision identification for a group of leaders. Because I always find when a group of game studio leaders have been working together for a while, they probably have some sort of values written down, but they're not really reflective of the wisdom that they as a group have already got in their heads. So I like to do something with leaders where we talk about, go around to each of the leaders and say, just tell me about the best day you've ever had working here, and talk me through it. Talk me through it from when you got up that morning. And as they talk, I look for anything that describes behaviors and I write them down on a post-it note. And they say, "Oh, it's this particular day, this was happening, and then I came in and then I spoke to this person. Oh yeah, what was that person doing? And then we did this together, and then that happened, and then we got this feature working that we've been trying to get working for ages, or then we solved this technical challenge that we've been trying to solve, and we did it together. It was awesome." And you write that all down, and then you group those together, and you have this set of behaviors from everybody's experience, and you can then group and see where this group of leaders has common things. And then you can say, why? Look at these grouped things here. What is it we value that made these so important on these best days we had at work? And from there, you get a set of values and that are grounded in behavior. That those people, they already knew, they just hadn't expressed it in that way. And from there, you can say, if that's, and then there's this distinction between vision and mission, right? So mission is the thing you have to achieve as a business. We have, and that's what typically is, often gets mixed up with the vision. It's like, we have to ship this sort of game in this kind of time frame with these sorts of characteristics. That's a mission, right? What we want separate from that, and based in looking at all of this soup of behavior that we've just created, is a vision. And the vision should answer the question, this is how we want to change the world. Because if you're going to have a game studio, you may as well try and change the world, right? In some way, you may as well do something great. And the vision should be beyond the horizon. You should be able to imagine it. So the vision should be imaginable. the mission should be achievable, and you should keep them separate. And the vision should inspire me. It should inspire these people in the room
Mm-hmm.
who are leading the studio. If they're inspired by that vision and they believe that they can achieve that mission with these values, what's moving closer towards that vision, now they've got an opportunity to go out to the studio they lead and start inspiring those people. Now, it may be as individuals they are going to go on some personal leadership journey,
Right.
and self-awareness thing as well, too. But that's the core of it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing to me always, though. I've done it multiple times with multiple leadership groups. I think, well, will it still work? Will it work with this group of people in this situation? It always has. The wisdom is always in there. And they kind of look at it, because people usually have some sort of written values, don't they?
Sure.
Already. But then they look at what they produce through this process. And they go, oh, it's similar, but it's different. It's so much better. It's so much more an expression of us. Yeah. Or they might even say it's so much more authentic. Yeah. Because you had it. Yeah. You just needed a way of bringing it out in a way you could talk to the people who are going to work at this studio about who you want to be. That isn't all about, we're going to make this game do. I mean, that's still important. We've all got, the last 6-12 months have taught us anything. You need to achieve business objectives if you want to be in business. We know that.
Of course.
It's who are we going to be while we're doing it that can really bring that group of people together to do something amazing together, to really change the world. Wow. Now I'm excited. Now I want to come in every day.
Beautiful. Yeah, exactly. The vision is kind of like the fuel, right? The thing that keeps you going.
Yeah, so to come back to it from time to time and say, hey, are we any closer to that vision? That thing we wrote down in that offside with Steve?
Yes.
Are we any closer to it? Oh, actually, in some ways we are. Like you say, give yourself some fuel to keep going through the hard times.
Exactly. Something that I've seen before is we usually tend to, especially as an engineer, in my previous companies, we tended to be very focused on the mission. And from time to time, we tended to get detached from the vision. Yeah. As a leader, how can you constantly keep up that story going of the vision? Remember the vision. How can you keep that alive while we focus on the here and now?
Yeah, so I think you have to hold yourself accountable as a leadership group to do that thing that I just say, is to come back to it every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever it is, and say, are we closer? Not in a way of encouraging yourselves, like we said, as well as asking yourself what you might need to change and do better. But also it's this idea of being outcome driven is so important to me in that as well, because if as a studio leader or a leader of say a feature team, you're focused on outcome about what you want to do for the player, then it's so much more natural to say, hey, we want the player to feel this way and have this experience within these constraints, for sure. To link that back to ultimately, because ultimately this is how we want to change the world with our video games. Ultimately, from time to time, it'll feel natural to you,
right?
And then it'll start to feel natural to talk about it as well. I mean, not every day, right? Because that starts to become a bit weird for people.
Sure.
But just for time to time, when it's natural and authentic, when you believe it yourself, then you bring it into the natural flow of that process of incrementally making builds of your software that hopefully getting you closer towards the game you want to ship.
Definitely. And I see that very successful companies like Apple, like Nike, they embody their vision, and you see their employees, like let's say Apple values innovation and creativity. You can see that in their employees.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that process I talked about it being with that studio leadership group, which is really important, but it's then got to go through a stage of feedback from everyone there. Everyone needs,
Yes.
this is like where your psychological safety is really important. It's like to say, I recognize that in us, I don't recognize that in us. What do you mean by that? Have you expressed that kind of conversation with people so that it's shaped together becomes really important, because you've had a hand in shaping
Right.
you know that that values process, and then you should feel good about we should all feel good in a studio then about holding one another accountable to those, if we once we've aligned on it. As a leader, I should be able to say, and you should be able to tell me if you see me not living this at any time.
Yes.
It should be
Yeah.
fine for you to say that to me. Again, back to that psych safety, without any fear of recrimination on you as well.
Yes, ideally, yes. But as we mentioned before, the social repercussions of you as a regular employee telling that to your boss, they don't like that, Steve. They don't
No,
like that.
well,
I tell you because I've
exactly.
done it before.
And
They don't like it.
once they're liberated, they'll love it.
Yes,
Once
hopefully.
they've
So
done
yeah, they gotta read your book, man. They gotta read it ASAP because they don't like that. I'm telling you. Because personally, I tend to be for me, uh, direct communication is very important, and I think if you are holding me accountable, which is totally fair, I think it should be the other way around as well. If you're leading us, right? Hey, I think this is not working, for example. But
it.
in my personal experience, the response has been 99% of the times. Uh, they take it personally. It's kind of like an attack on their ego.
Yeah,
Like, oh, like how dare you?
yeah. If you're holding on to a model that you should have all the answers, or that you should be perfect, or whatever, then you're going to feel any criticism
Yes.
is like that as well, right? I would say there is a quid pro quo in the relationship if you do create psychological safety. Is just because you're going to tell me everything, all your ideas and everything you think's wrong, and hopefully you're going to tell me about everything you think we're doing well as well.
Right, of course.
But of all the things you would prefer to be different, just because you tell me about them doesn't mean every single one of them is going to change, right? I still have to make trade-offs and decisions.
Right.
So that isn't what we're saying. That's the difference between servant and servant leadership. It isn't you tell me everything that's wrong and I do absolutely everything that you suggest. Right? That's not the deal. I still have
Right.
responsibility to lead, but I'm informed by what you have told me and what you've fed back to me. And also, if I've been through that clear values creation process that I talked about, you should understand the basis on which I'm going to make those decisions as well, even though you're probably not going to be in the room when I make the decision. You
Right.
should know that's the basis on which I'm going to do them, because I'm going to make, as far as possible, I'm going to make the decision that maximizes the expression of those values that we talked about before. So that,
Gotcha.
yeah, that is so that relationship is important. But yeah, you have to let go of that, who you think you are, to the people you lead, to
Mm-hmm.
create the psychological safety, to not feel attacked by someone saying something's wrong, because things are wrong all the time, right?
Yeah,
Things go wrong
exactly.
all the time, and another one of my favorites as well. The only real failure is failure to learn. We
Ooh.
can fail all the time. We just can't fail to learn. If we fail to learn, we will crash
Exactly.
eventually. But if we keep learning and keep doing better, and we keep making new mistakes, hopefully, and we keep learning, we have every chance of succeeding together.
What has been the thing that has brought you the most amount of joy when it comes to coaching? Because before you were a game creator, a leader, now you're coaching. You used to be a king, now you're a king maker.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
yeah,
I think
what brings you the most
that
amount of
journey
joy?
from the one to the other is not really binary. I suppose as I got more and more into leadership, I started, and more senior positions within Criterion and Electronic Arts, I guess I spent more and more of my time, and I think this is a good thing, coaching and growing and developing other leaders as well. In anyone's career, the step from individual contributor to manager and leader is a big one, and lots of companies fumble it and don't give enough support. But the one that's not talked about quite so much actually is the leader of leaders.
Yeah.
The step where you become a leader of leaders. So now you're not leading the people doing the work, you're leading the people who are leading the people who are doing the work.
Yeah.
That's a massive step too to take, and where people really need masses of career support and very rarely get it in a way. So what gave me the most pleasure, just there's a very this is probably it actually. This little award here, probably can't see that, Inspiration of the Year.
Okay.
2015. That probably made me happier than anything I've done in many ways in creating games. And the games are great. I love it when players love the games, but it was voted for by the members of the studio.
Okay.
And there were some lovely comments made on that. And you think, well, I've tried so hard to give people material that will help them grow, help them be better game developers, help them, to go back to right where we started, to work on themselves so that they can work on the game, make themselves better so the game can be better ultimately. To feel like that landed for people, and massively satisfying for me.
Exactly. Having that impact, basically.
Yeah, and a lot of it is because you're right to say I started in '94 when I was 23 or something, right? And was in a leadership position straight away because that's where the industry was. It was just been invented, really.
Right.
So there was nobody with even 10 years experience, let alone 20 or 30, to kind of go, Steve, you're making some really obvious mistakes.
Right.
Just try it like this. That would have been awesome if there was at the time. So I just feel that as an industry, we have made phenomenal strides in a relatively small period of time. But there's still too much suffering within our industry. And so we have to keep learning, and we have to keep growing really rapidly, and we have to improve the quality of leadership. I think that's the biggest accelerant of how we're more effective as people, as teams, and then collectively of all those teams as an industry. It's the biggest thing that I know about, that I can help influence as well. So any contribution to that I can make is massively rewarding to me right now, and a big reason why I wrote the book is to get that conversation out there. People could see my leadership journey and try and pass the torch a little bit, from what I've learned.
Yes. Speaking of passing the torch, what would your advice be for this newer generation? People like myself who are like entering the industry. And you, as you mentioned before, when you started, there was nothing really written because the industry just was taking shape. But now that you have all this wisdom, what would be your advice for the next generation?
So, are you talking about somebody who's in the industry or someone who wants to get into the industry?
Okay, very good distinction. Let's start with someone who wants to get in, and then let's talk about someone who's like in the industry.
Yeah, so my simple answer to the first one, if you want to make games, make games. It's really it's never been easier to make a video game than it is today. So make games. It doesn't matter if it's rubbish. It doesn't matter if you're the only person who plays it. if you can, try and make a game with at least one other person. Go through that process of having to adapt your ideas around a collaborator. So have a collaborative experience. There's engines out there, free engines out there. There's tools. Just make some simple games. Express your ideas. Find out what it's like. It's the number one thing, and do it with someone else, at least one other person.
Right.
That would be the biggest thing. Whatever your craft is as well. If you want to be a writer, write. If you want to be an artist, create art, and find some other people who want to put it into a game for you as well. That would be my number one thing. Then, if we're talking about someone who's in the industry, and I'll talk about leadership because it's my chosen specialized subject. And I would say start leading now. And that means thinking a little bit differently about what leadership is. And I used to say, how do you know if you're a leader? Well, have a look behind you and see if anyone's following you. If anyone's following you, you're a leader, right? So, yes, there's people called leads. There'll be senior people in your team. But to practice your leadership, have a look at your influence on the team around you. If somebody follows what you're doing, the things you say, the actions you take, that's the beginning of learning how to lead. And you might actually find when you look at it that way that you're a bit more of a leader already than perhaps you are, because so many leaders are anointed rather than appointed, right? Or they get anointed, the anointment becomes after the appointment, if you know what I mean. You're already doing it, and someone notices it and gives you the appointment.
Gotcha.
That's what I would say.
I love that. As I mentioned before, wisdom does not come for free. And by reading your book, I can see that there's so much wisdom here. And I wish the next generation, and people in the industry right now, but as well as the next generation, can have this knowledge, because it's so valuable to have a leader who has a quiet ego, who's patient, who inspires trust. It's very important.
Thank you.
Very, very important. Steve, do you have any last comments before we finish our show for today?
I would say, if people do read the book, I'd love to hear their feedback from it. The people can contact me via my website, thegameplanconsultancy.co.uk. I'm Steve at thegameplanconsultancy.co.uk, because I really believe in John Kabat-Zinn brought mindfulness to the West. And he took the sort of mysticism out of meditation and gave us mindfulness. He's a professor of stress release. I think it was the University of Chicago. But he said, we work on ourselves to help others, but we help others to work on ourselves as well. And it's so true to me. I always learn from the people I coach, the people I train, the people I consult with. And so I just love to hear how people respond to the book as well. So that'd be my ask.
We're going to have the link, the Amazon link to the book in the description if you're interested, which I really recommend. Please give it a read. Steve, if a game studio, if they want to hire you to be a consultant, do they just go to your website? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, or exactly that email address I mentioned, Steve at thegameplanconsultancy.co.uk. I monitor that regularly, or reach out to me on LinkedIn is really easy as well. I'm looking for studios to work with all the time. I love that work.
All right, awesome. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be super beneficial for anyone who hires you, because I can see that you bring such a fresh and new and mindful take on leadership that's really missing in this day and age. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.